are listening to The Jake Asman Show on the SportsMap Radio Network.
Presented by Rocket Mortgage.
Live from the O'Reilly Auto Parts Studios, here's Jake Asman.
We waste no time with our next guest. He's been on the show a ton in the past. He's a great guy and a excellent NFL insider. He is Adam Caplan. You can follow him on Twitter at Caplan NFL. And he joins us right now on our progressive guest line. Adam, appreciate the time. Great to catch up with you here, my friend.
Jake, good to talk to you. It's been a while. Yeah, we're here almost in June. We're getting through this OTA season in the National Football League as we get closer to training camp and lots going on.
So you mentioned OTAs. What to you, Adam, is the biggest storyline you're following here with OTAs upon us?
Well, in terms of practices, it's just you're trying to figure out who's going to win jobs, particularly the quarterback position. We've got the situation with the Bears, when's Justin Fields going to play, with the Niners, when's Trey Lance going to play, and so forth. And then, of course, the veteran stories, what's going to happen with Julio Jones. Typically this time of year, by the way, we don't really have a lot of player news because these situations are resolved by the draft or through the draft. The players are traded, and then you kind of move on. But with the Julio Jones situation, the Aaron Rodgers situation, particularly the Julio Jones, because something could happen as early as this coming June 2nd, these situations bear watching.
You mentioned Julio Jones. What are you hearing there? Do you think it is more likely than not that he's no longer going to be a Falcon when it's all said and done?
Yeah, I do. I think it's now, again, just to be clear here, it doesn't mean he has to be traded next week. The earliest he can be traded because of their situation with the salary cap would be June 2nd. And then you've got, of course, the last time you could trade him would be the trade deadline in October. The reason why is not just what Jones feels. It's if you look at it from a cap standpoint, right? They can't even sign the rookies right now. They could get relief if they trade him starting on June 2nd. And then you also have the trade deadline in October. That would be the latest. So that's really your timeline. I do believe what you want to do, talking to personnel people around the league, with a situation like this, which is when you're in a team that's in transition, the sooner you do it, the better. You get your compensation for next year. You make a decision on how you're going to handle. If you are able to trade him soon, who's going to replace him? We know Calvin Ridley is an absolute star in the making. He becomes their number one pass target. They've got Kyle Pitts. It's not like if you trade Julio Jones, Jake, they're not great on offense. They could still be very, very good and probably will be. Their problem is on defense, and that's where they have to be rebuilt.
What's Julio Jones' trade value? I know the reports early on where they're looking for a first-round pick. I highly doubt any team would trade that for him at this point, but can they get a second-round pick for Julio Jones?
General manager, we were just talking about it. I was just called around the league yesterday to see what teams think about him. One team said to me, he goes, look, the only way you're giving up a first-round pick to get Julio Jones based on his age and injury history is if you're getting something back with Julio Jones. I mean, you let's say you're giving up a first, but you're getting Julio Jones and a pick it back. That's what this general manager said. He says, look, Julio Jones has probably got 3 years left in him. But here's what I do think. If he is traded relatively soon, I do believe it'll be with a playoff-bound team that thinks they're one player away. That's what people tell me around the league. Is that's if you're going to trade for him, you clearly believe you're a playoff team that's trying to make a playoff run.
Adam Caplan with us here. Follow him on Twitter at Caplan NFL. Also check out the Adam Caplan Show, which you could watch on Twitch. Adam, looking at the Aaron Rodgers situation now, I mean, what's your take on the comments he made the other night on SportsCenter? And, of course, the Packers' stance that they're not trading him. They hope to still work it out.
Yeah, in my reporting on this, Jake, since we haven't talked, I could just give you a couple things here that I think are sort of interesting. So, look, if anyone who works for the Packers knows that Aaron Rodgers is pretty stubborn, and I know the reporters know this, who've covered Aaron Rodgers since he was drafted in 2005, he just is a guy that will hold a grudge if he's got one. In this case, he clearly does against the general manager of the Packers, Brian Gutekunst. This is not a secret to anyone who knows what's going on. Anyone who's close to the Packers knows that the report from ESPN that came out right before the draft was really nothing new. If you cover the team, it just got it was reported correctly, by the way. But this goes back to last season, and I could tell you a good nugget that no one knew about, which I put out on a company I work called Sports Grid, is that last season during a game against one of the opponents, he went over to the defensive huddle. He didn't go in it, but he went over to a defensive huddle of the opponent and said, "Get me out of here." That was his quote. That happened according to a source with the team that played the Packers. So The guy clearly wants out. He's not happy, and you know what it comes down to, Jake? When you have a player on your football team who's a star who will go in the Hall of Fame, you make sure you communicate well before you make this decision to draft a quarterback. You let him know, and I understand with the COVID issue, you may not have been able to do it in person, but you could call the guy, say, Aaron, this is what we're thinking of doing. It may or may not happen. We want you to know. You deserve to know this. That's what Gutekunst should have done, but he didn't do that. And that is the source of Rodgers' angst. And obviously, as Rodgers said, and I believe him, he doesn't have a problem with Jordan Love. It's the fact that they did this without telling him. That's kind of where it's at.
So, Adam, if this standoff continues, do you think he'd sit out of regular season games, or ultimately he'd show up and maybe play out his last year? We kind of have like a last dance version with the Green Bay Packers and Rodgers.
Yeah, I don't think it'll come down to that. I do believe that if he doesn't show up to training camp, I think they'll wind up moving him because when you're willing to take the fines, right? In the new CBA, the fines are not in training camp the thousands. If you miss all of training camp and the mandatory camp in June, you're talking about millions of dollars lost, and they cannot rescind those fines. That would mean he's super duper serious, and he obviously was continuing to hold it was fast. And by the way, if you heard his interview with Kenny Mayne on SportsCenter, I mean, he wouldn't even address some of the stuff that he was willing to talk last season and kind of where he's at with what happened, but he just wouldn't deny some of the stuff that he just wouldn't talk about it. So you kind of know where this thing's at. This thing cannot end well. It's very easy to say, May, you're not trading somebody. This is what I learned 3 years ago with the Raiders. When they told me they were not going to trade Khalil Mack, and then as you know, in August, John Gruden, who had personnel control, then decided he wanted him off the roster, and that's what happened.
Adam Caplan with us here. He's an NFL insider. You can find him on Twitter at Caplan NFL. And of course, the other quarterback story, and it hits home where I'm based out of in Houston, Deshaun Watson. I mean, ultimately, Adam, of course, the litigation is still playing out. But if you're the NFL and there's a player that's now facing 22 civil lawsuits, do you have to put him on the exempt list? Could you let him play with that many lawsuits that he's facing?
Here's the way it's going to come down to, Jake, Dance, because this is what I've been looking at, what you just talked about, the commissioner's special exemption. To do it, to put them on the exemption, they have to feel like there's a reason to that the information that they're getting in the early part of their investigation is enough that they think there's a concern, and then they definitely would do it. Now, the problem is, but as we move this forward, if you're a team that wants to trade for him, right, you have to know, A, that he's playing this season. There is no guarantee that Deshaun Watson will play this season. Then you have to, and this is the biggest part about it, as some of the teams have told me, one personnel man in particular made this point, and I keep using it. Are you comfortable making the face of your franchise? If you're going to trade for him, as you know, Jake, as a star quarterback, you live in that area, you have to feel like this is the guy you want on the billboards. You want as the face of the franchise. That, to me, is the reason why it's going to be very difficult to get, if you're Nick Caserio, the value that you want, which would have been 3 first-round picks, if not more, at the start of free agency. But once this information came out on his background, that's been alleged, it's going. If he does get traded, I'd be fascinated to see what the compensation is. But this is such a unique situation. We've never seen anything like this in the history of the National Football League.
And then plus any team that takes him on, I mean, you could be looking at some point here an actual suspension from the league as well. I mean, Zeke got 6 games for one civil lawsuit, of course. I mean, how many could Watson get down the line?
Well, first of all, let's just to be clear here. We just have accusations.
Yep.
Watson's not been charged with anything. So, and Brother Roethlisberger went through this many years ago and was not charged and was suspended. So there's no way to know, because this is totally unprecedented, how many games it could potentially be. And again, the league could suspend a player without a player being charged. So obviously the baseline would be 6 games, but again, it really does come down to what they find out and what it really is.
Adam, the Jets are starting OTAs this upcoming week, and I know that you've had a good relationship with Jets GM Joe Douglas dating back to his days in Philly. What's your take on what the Jets have done this offseason? They've been active, they've been aggressive, and they, of course, now have a new quarterback leading them in Zach Wilson.
Yeah, I love what they did. It's funny. Joe was a guy that came from Baltimore, where they wouldn't delve into free agency very much. Joe was an old school scout, but they kind of spent a lot of money. As being a Jets fan, I mean, whether Corey Davis, that was an enormous contract. That kind of surprised me that they went as deep as they did. The Carl Lawson contract, he's a good football player, formerly of the Bengals, very underrated player. One of my favorite moves is a move that a lot of Jet fans don't know much about, or they don't know the player. Jared Davis, a former first-rounder a linebacker for the Lions. I remember talking to the Lions about him. When they got him, they had him a certain way, and then when Matt Patricia came in, he didn't really fit the Matt Patricia scheme, so they made him more of a pass rusher. And with remember, they're going to a 43 front now under Robert Saleh, their head coach. He's bringing in the Seattle system. So look for him to kind of be a pass rusher, and he could also play middle linebacker. I think that's fascinating. I thought, and by the way, they also had a good draft on paper. Talking to other teams who've looked at their draft, they've done well. Now, Zach Wilson, though, Jake, kind of an unknown. Didn't start a lot of games at the collegiate level from BYU, but I know he's got a pretty good athlete, very good arm, very super competitive player. By the way, very competitive. I'm looking forward to seeing how he does with the Jets this season. Do
you think ultimately, he's going to be the week one guy? I mean, you look at the roster right
now.
They don't have a veteran. He's playing all 16 games or 17 games.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he absolutely will be. Like I was saying earlier at the top of our discussion here, we could look at all those 5 quarterbacks drafted in the first round, and we could try to project. The one that's really tough for me is Mac Jones because of Cam Newton. That one's really hard to project which week he'll start. He'll eventually start the season. I mean, I just don't know what week that'll be. I would be very surprised if Cam Newton starts all 16 games this season, the regular season.
Adam, what's your take on Tebow time back in Jacksonville?
I mean, it's kind of funny, and I know we're in May here. I mean, if we're in August, no one would care other than it's the name Tebow. He's making a 1-year veteran minimum deal. There's no guaranteed money. I looked at his contract last week. You know what? He's a good person. At 34 years old, he hasn't played in an NFL regular season game in almost 10 years. He's going to be more of an H-back, as I understand it, than a true tight end. He has to learn how to block, and it's an extreme long shot, okay? I know Urban Meyer coached him for 4 years at Florida. That's why this is happening. This is not a PR stunt. I mean, I know he truly cares about Tebow, and Tebow wants to give it the old college try, so to speak. But it's highly unlikely he's going to make it, and I know people are making way too much of it. He's got to earn his roster spot, folks. That's the key here.
Would you draft Tim Tebow in your fantasy league, Adam, last pick?
No, I would not. In fact, it's funny you mentioned that. I cannot go back. I don't remember him being good for fantasy, to be honest with you, as a Denver Broncos quarterback.
He got a lot of rushing attempts as a quarterback. So I remember, you being able to put him in and you hope he gets a rushing touchdown. And, if you had no one else, maybe you could score you some points back in like 2011, whenever that Tebow time mania was.
Oh yeah, and remember that the playoff game against the Steelers was almost shocking. I mean, that's when I remember being on Twitter then. I just couldn't believe it, when they were able to get that win. But look, he's a guy that had severe issues with his passing mechanics, and he was Josh McDaniels, the then head coach of personnel control of the Broncos, when he drafted him in the first round, and then Josh would not give up. Don't forget, he came to New England in 2015. I remember. The Patriots came in to Philly for a preseason game. They also practiced for 2 days. Tebow was so bad throwing the football. You just felt bad for him. And then he went to the Eagles. And I remember Chip Kelly saying that Tim really needs to he said he actually needed a lot of work. He should go to the CFL and kind of refine his mechanics. It just never worked out for him.
Adam, before I let you go, your Twitch page, the Adam Caplan Show, I know you're doing some shows there. Tell people what it's all about.
Yeah, so just go. You can follow me on Twitter @CaplanNFL, and you'll see my links to it. As Jake said, it's the Adam Caplan Show, and what we do is Monday through Thursday night and we'll do Friday once we get closer to training camps. But from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern, we chat for an hour and we take questions from 32 teams. Not any particular team. It's whatever fan base you're from. We'll take fantasy questions. And it doesn't cost you anything. Just subscribe to it so you get the alerts, and we do it. And it's going to be great because when I go for my training camp tour for Sirius XM, I'll be doing a chat from every single camp. And 2 years ago, my last camp, we didn't have one. My tour, I didn't do a tour last summer, but when I did one 2 years ago, I was at 24 camps, which in 19 years is the most I've ever won. Pretty exhausting, but I really enjoy it.
Awesome. Check it out, the Adam Caplan Show on Twitch, and then you can follow Adam on Twitter @CaplanNFL. Adam, great to catch up with you, my friend. We got to do this again soon. Thanks so much for coming on, and good luck with the show. Look forward to watching.
Thank you. See you.
Adam Caplan with us there on our progressive guest line. Quick break, and we wrap up our show. Final show until Monday. I'm working Memorial Day, but I'm off tomorrow, and I'm off on Saturday. We'll wrap up the Jake Asman Show for the week. Coming up next right here on Sports Map Radio.
The Jake Asman Show.